Well, to officially get started, welcome everyone. My name is Liz Harris. My pronouns are she and her, and I work for BikeWalk as the marketing and events coordinator. I welcome you to our 2023 policy platform rollout. Michael has been hard at work laying out this policy platform, and I know he's looking forward to presenting it tonight and talking about big plans that we've got this year. I invite everyone to introduce themselves in the chat if they like. This is a meeting format, so we invite you to participate, but for the time being, we're going to keep everybody muted just so that Michael can kind of get the ball rolling with the policy platform. But please feel free to use the chat function to ask questions. We'll collect those, and we'll also talk about some of the questions that you submitted when you registered for the event. We want to make sure that we address any questions that folks have. Other things, I am going to turn on Zoom's live transcription service. And I'm also, you will have to turn it on your end as well if you choose to use the transcription. It is mostly accurate, though you will see BikeWalkKC spelled in 40 different ways throughout the evening. It doesn't come across as BikeWalkKC, since that's not a standard noun, I guess. And I think that I am going to go ahead and unshare my screen so that I can turn on that transcription service and let Michael share his screen. And then we'll get started with the evening, okay? Give me just a second, Michael. Well, I said I was going to do transcription, and I think that I updated Zoom, and now it's got new stuff going on. Okay, Michael, you go ahead, and I will keep working on it.
Okay, all right.
Okay, there we go. That should be good.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Kelly. My pronouns are he, him. I am the policy director here at BikeWalkKC, and I want to thank you all again for taking some time this evening to learn more about our policy platform. Before I get into my presentation, I did want to ask all the attendees tonight if you would be willing to join me in a moment of silence for Tyree Nichols. As I'm sure everyone here has heard at this point, Tyree Nichols was a 29-year-old Black man who was killed in a very violent interaction with police several days ago as a result of a traffic stop. BikeWalkKC very firmly believes that we cannot create a more mobile, a more transportation accessible Kansas City or region unless we are also working to break down the barriers which lead to unnecessary and violent interactions with police. And so we are all incredibly saddened by Tyree's death, and we recognize that we have to use this as an opportunity to call for not only accountability for the officers who killed him, but for changes to the system which made that interaction inevitable. So again, if you will join me in a moment of silence for Tyree Nichols. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And with that, I am going to share my screen, and we are going to get going with our policy platform discussion tonight. So I'm going to share. Liz, can you see the screen?
Yep, sure can.
Okay, great. And as I'm speaking, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and if it isn't covered in this presentation, we will cover it afterwards. So What we're going to be talking about tonight, moving through the 2023 policy platform. This is a look at BikeWalkKC's policy and advocacy priorities for the year. So I'm going to give a quick outline of what we're going to be talking about. We will be looking at KCK, excuse me, regional and suburban areas, statewide efforts in both Missouri and Kansas. And we will finish by taking a look at what we'll be focusing on at the federal and national level. So before we jump into the policy stuff, I wanted to take a moment to give an overview of BikeWalkKC as an organization. So the mission of BikeWalkKC is to redefine our streets as places for people to build a culture of active living. We work to achieve this through 5 primary areas of focus. Advocacy. We advocate for a better built environment for people who need or want to walk, cycle, roll, or more. This means speaking up for the policies, the plans, and the projects which make those forms easier and more reliable throughout the metro and beyond. Education. BikeWalkKC has one of the largest education programs of its kind in the country. We work to teach children and adults how to ride and walk safely, maintain their bikes, and more. And during the pandemic, we have shifted many of our operations to virtual settings, but we are getting back to offering outdoor activities as well. Community planning. We also have a community planner on staff who works to provide technical assistance to municipalities and other stakeholders working on planning and projects that will bring those important changes to the built environment. This includes work on traffic calming demonstration projects, as well as citywide planning documents for active transportation. Additionally, BikeWalkKC relies on data collection to tell a story and provide support to our planning and advocacy efforts, best encapsulated within our community dashboard. Where reliable data is missing, we are able to partner with experts and organizations to research these issues to improve understanding of important topics. Finally, we run the local bike share program. We have rolled out electric assist bikes to give riders a boost, and we are working to extend our offerings into other parts of the region in the near future. All of our bikes are now dockless, meaning that you don't need to return them to a kiosk to end a ride, but you do need to park it out of the right of way so it doesn't block the sidewalk. So with that, let's jump into the policy platform, and we're going to begin by looking at Kansas City, Missouri, where there are lots of planning updates and implementation to pursue. So the first thing that we want to work on is a walkability plan update. So the current walkability plan is old. It dates back to 2003 and is long overdue for an update. This is especially true given that there are new funding opportunities for improving sidewalks, i.e. the GO bonds, and new documents which didn't exist in 2003, such as the Vision Zero Action Plan, as well as the Climate Protection and Resiliency Plan. BikeWalkKC conducted outreach to stakeholders and partners throughout 2022 to get input on what is needed in a new plan. This included conversations with groups like the Whole Person, AARP, Urban League of Kansas City, KCATA, and others. So in 2023, we will advocate for the City Council to prioritize and fund a new updated walkability plan. Stay tuned for more ways to get involved with this. Vision Zero funding. So KCMO's initial budget of $500,000 a year for Vision Zero safety improvements is a great start, but it still falls short of the need to make all of our streets as safe as they can be. BikeWalkKC will advocate for a significant increase in funding to accelerate Vision Zero implementation. This will be especially important since the city recently received $880,000 through a new federal grant program called Safe Streets and Roads for All to support the upgrade of some key design guides and other documents. For neighborhoods across the city, we're recognizing that there are ongoing challenges in terms of navigating City Hall bureaucracy to advocate for projects which improve their safety and accessibility. So as a result, we will continue to partner with communities to help grow their capacity to advocate for themselves at City Hall. We will also look to train advocates through in-person opportunities, as well as virtual options like our virtual budget advocacy training coming up next week. So with regards to the KC Spirit Playbook and the Climate Protection Resiliency Plan, a little bit of background on these two. So the Kansas City Spirit Playbook is the update to the city's comprehensive plan. And a comprehensive plan is essentially what it sounds like, a document which covers all aspects of how a city intends to grow and develop, typically over a couple of decades. The last iteration of this was the focus plan, and over the last 2 to 3 years, the city's planning department has been working to develop the KC Spirit Playbook to not only replace the focus plan, but to guide our efforts in Kansas City for the next 20 years. With regards to the climate protection and resiliency plan, by contrast, that is a plan that was developed largely within the last year or so. Kansas City has a climate protection steering committee, and they were charged with developing this plan, which is meant to guide Kansas City's efforts to become carbon neutral by the year 2040. It covers 6 key areas: mobility, how homes and buildings, energy, natural systems, food systems, and waste materials. And so both of these plans have very big, clear elements related to walking and biking, not only in terms of what is written within the documents, but how they can be interpreted to advance active transportation and mobility throughout Kansas City. So as a result, Kansas City will be working to push to implement the policies, plans, and projects authorized or suggested, recommended within these plans to help improve active transportation throughout the city. With the KC Spirit Playbook, that plan is being finalized, and virtual meetings are happening now to present these draft plans to the public. That will then go to the city council to be considered for a vote, and BikeWalkKC will work to advocate for its passage. With regards to the climate protection and resiliency plan, this plan has already been adopted thanks to your advocacy efforts back in 2022. And so now the work begins to start implementing different parts of the plan. The climate protection and resiliency plan has a short-term implementation strategy guideline that covers all of the areas, including mobility. So our work will be to identify especially the walking, biking, and accessibility elements from the short-term implementation plan, and working to advocate for those things to get implemented by City Hall. So with Midtown Complete Streets, one of the areas where we have seen an increasing number of crashes and a desire to do something more is with Midtown. I'm sure some of you may be familiar. There was a very violent crash along Broadway last year, which killed 2 people in a car as well as a pedestrian on the street. That crash happened on Broadway, a street that the city has known has been dangerous for some time and has failed to take action to fix. Despite the fact that we had developed a Midtown Complete Streets plan, many of those elements have not been carried out and implemented by City Hall. And so, in part because of that crash, but also broader concerns around pedestrian, cyclist, accessibility, safety, we convened a meeting with stakeholders last year to learn more about their concerns. As you can see here, we were also able to bring in city staff to explain some of the efforts that have already been implemented, such as the 31st Street traffic calming. As a result of what we had learned and heard from residents there, we have identified 39th Street as a priority for safety improvements and implementation, as recommended in part by the Midtown Complete Streets Plan, but also by the Vision Zero Action Plan. And so the work that we're going to be doing now will be with stakeholders to try to identify how we can build a coalition to ultimately push for necessary changes along this corridor. Finally, with the Trail KC plan. So the Trail KC plan is another document that was developed by City Hall that has unfortunately been allowed to gather dust on a shelf. The Trail KC plan is a plan that is meant to guide how Kansas City develops its trail system and connect it with other key systems in the area, whether that be on the Kansas side or systems that are broader within Missouri, such as the Katy Trail system. Because it had been sitting on the shelf for so long and because nothing had really been done with it, a resolution was introduced late last year to call for an update to that plan because it hadn't been updated since, I believe, 2008. And so now that the ball has kind of been put in motion to update this plan, BikeWalkKC will work with residents, trail developers, and other stakeholders to ensure that there is broad involvement and voice given to people who use these trails to ensure that we're not only developing and making the right connections, but also that we are working to ensure that it is a system that works for everyone. So with that KCMO stuff out of the way, we can jump across the state line over to KCK and look at what we'll be doing there, which will largely focus on not only changing the approach, but also changing the culture around walking and biking in that area. So first, let's talk about the GoDOT Strategic Mobility Plan. So for those of you who may not be familiar, the GoDOT Strategic Mobility Plan is a document which was developed by the UG's planning department over the course of several months last year. And what it is meant to be is it's meant to be a comprehensive transportation document for the unified government, Wyandotte County and KCK, as they work to not only identify what are the trends in terms of transportation demand. Is it more walking? Is it more biking? Is it more transit? But also figuring out what are the key corridors that they need to focus on to create a comprehensive, effective system that is safe and accessible for everyone. So with regards to the GoDOT Strategic Mobility Plan, the UG finalized this plan last summer. It is the first comprehensive document of its kind for Wyandotte County. BikeWalkKC was involved in shaping portions of the document, and we will spend much of 2023 helping residents and staff to implement some of the initial portions of this plan. The other part of this work will involve working with what's known as the Community Connections and Trails Coalition. So in 2022, Kansas City, Kansas residents and regional partners organized a workshop with the League of American Bicyclists. So the League of American Bicyclists is a national organization which works on issues related primarily to advocacy and education as it relates to biking issues around the country. The purpose of this event was to determine how to make Wyandotte County a bike-friendly community. And so a big part of that effort was identified as working to change the culture, that there are people who want to bike, there are people who do bike in Kansas City, but if we're serious about creating a bike-friendly community, there's a lot more that we have to do to help change the culture. People have to learn more about e-bikes. They have to learn about the different types of infrastructure. They have to learn about end-of-trip facilities like lockers and fix-it stands. And so all of that work is largely going to be the focus of this coalition over the next few months. BikeWalkKC will work with these partners on the ground to identify opportunities to share information, but we'll also work to promote awareness around biking through things such as Bike Month activities in May. Stay tuned for more information. Shifting gears again, we're now going to the regional and suburban parts of Kansas City. And so what we mean when we're talking about the regional and suburban parts, when we're talking regionally, we mean kind of as a region, as a whole. Kansas City, Missouri is one part of the broader 5-county region and the more than 100 municipalities that make our region a region. And then within the suburbs of that, we're talking about the communities that don't always get as much attention as KCMO and KCK, but are no less important in terms of supporting efforts to improve active transportation and mobility choice for everyday people. So beginning with the regional opportunities, there are several issues we'll be working on this year which don't neatly fit into one jurisdiction. The first is building community advocacy capacity. So BikeWalkKC continues to see success in helping individuals and groups advocate for improvements in their communities, especially as communities begin to identify and pursue projects across multiple jurisdictions. So corridor projects, especially in Northeast Johnson County, for example, it will be more important than ever to support people on the ground as they speak up for active transportation. Additionally, one of the main active transportation programs created by the bipartisan infrastructure law is the Carbon Reduction Program. This program is intended to support efforts to lower transportation emissions specifically, which creates big opportunities to fund things related to walking, accessibility, biking, and transit. One example we're currently discussing with the Mid-America Regional Council, the region's metropolitan planning organization, is some iteration of what's known as an e-bike rebate program. This would be similar to programs being deployed in Denver, Atlanta, Nashville, and beyond. And essentially, the way that this works is that if you want to buy an e-bike in these communities, you are given a rebate to help offset the cost of this. It varies considerably from community to community. It also varies in terms of things such as, are you going to buy accessories? Is it a regular e-bike or is it a cargo e-bike? There are a number of factors which go into this. Mark is interested in pursuing a regional option for this, but there are still several factors that we need to get figured out in order to determine not only whether this is eligible, but who would be responsible for administering the program. So finally, transit sales tax renewal. One of the key funding sources for transit will be up for renewal in 2023. And BikeWalkKC wants to see that preserved because we understand that transit is a big part of how we make active transportation work in our region. To that end, we'll be partnering with the Kansas City Regional Transit Alliance and others to campaign for the renewal of this important transit funding source. Going over to the suburbs, the work we'll be doing there is meant to build upon some of the key advocacy wins we notched in 2022. That starts with Leewood, the bike ped plan there. So one of my favorite advocacy stories from 2022 was that of Leah Moggins in Leewood. Leah is the mother of an 8-year-old son who was injured in a crash on a street that didn't have crosswalks. And so as a result, Leah organized her neighbors to push for change. She went to meetings, she got a petition signed, she invited her council member out to look at the street, and she was ultimately able to advocate to the city to not only install a new crosswalk on the street where her son was injured, but to create a crosswalk installation policy to make the process easier for others. That whole endeavor has spurred a conversation about whether the city needs to update its bike ped plan. BikeWalkKC will work with advocates to move this process forward and help them create a better document which is more inclusive and more accessible for everyone. Moving over to Riverside on the Missouri side. In conjunction with our planning department, BikeWalkKC is working to support Riverside's efforts to develop a comprehensive plan to guide the development of their town over the next 20 years. Part of that plan's development will involve potential recommendations related to active transportation. And these would likely build upon the city's complete streets policy, which BikeWalkKC helps city leaders to develop and adopt. And for those of you who may not be familiar, complete streets is the idea that streets should be for everyone, regardless of your preferred mode of transportation, whether it be walking, accessibility, biking, or transit. You deserve to get from one place to another as safely, as easily, and as reliably as everyone else. And so a complete streets policy works to make that possible by by identifying the instances where a city will work to advance active transportation elements, be it installing a new crosswalk, putting down a new bus stop, installing bike lanes, things of that nature. Finally, with independence. Late last year, BikeWalkKC helped local advocates to speak up in favor of complete streets improvements along Nolan Road. With the approval of that project and new leadership at Independence City Hall, there's reason for optimism here on the active transportation front. BikeWalkKC will use the next few months to explore further opportunities to advance elements of complete streets in the city. I'll also note that we recently met with some of the new city council members from Independence to learn more about some of the challenges that they're facing and also some of the opportunities. And so this will really help us to sharpen our advocacy elbows with this and find better ways for people to speak up for safer streets in Independence, Missouri. So with that out of the way, we can now go statewide, look at a bigger view, and look at the planning and policy opportunities in Jefferson City, Missouri, and Topeka, Kansas. So in Kansas, Kansas has been pretty proactive with working to update and finalize what's known as their statewide active transportation plan. An active transportation plan at the state level is a very kind of large document that is meant to inform how a state can take steps to improve walking and biking within their transportation system. And so this can be things such as coming up with better crosswalk installation policies on state roads, coming up with ways to encourage communities to adopt certain policies, um, keeping track of plans and elements that may inform walking and biking infrastructure installations, and looking at new funding opportunities. And so now that that document is complete, it's time to take the recommendations from the paper to the pavement. BikeWalk KC will be working with our partners across the Sunflower State, especially folks in Topeka, Manhattan, and Wichita, to ensure that KDOT works to quickly implement the guidance within this new plan. A big part of the implementation will be guided by the legislative cues and funding opportunities created by the adoption of the bipartisan infrastructure law. One program of note here is the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, which provides funding for planning and implementation activities to create safer streets for all, especially vulnerable road users. KDOT created a match program to help municipalities support these grant opportunities. And BikeWalk KC's role will involve informing leaders about these sorts of opportunities and taking steps to bring those dollars to the Sunflower State. On the Missouri side, our main priorities are largely a continuation of the efforts we've been working on at the state level here over the last couple of years. First, working with our partners at Missourians for Responsible Transportation, a statewide coalition including BikeWalk KC in Kansas City, TrailNet in St. Louis, Ozark Greenways in Springfield, and Locomotion in Columbia. BikeWalk KC was able to organize a meeting with MoDOT leaders to discuss the bipartisan infrastructure law and how the Show Me State could take steps to support more active transportation. During the meeting, we were able to confirm that the state is working to develop a statewide active transportation plan, the first of its kind potentially. This is a huge development for active transportation in Missouri, and BikeWalk KC will work to ensure that this process moves forward. Additionally, with Missouri, Missouri remains one of only 2 states in the nation without comprehensive distracted driver legislation. I will let people take a guess in the chat about what the other state is. But through our work with Missourians for Responsible Transportation, BikeWalk KC has been working to support efforts to get comprehensive distracted driving legislation through the state legislature for the last couple of years. That process will continue in 2023, and I can share at this point that we know of at least 7 pieces of distracted driving legislation which have been introduced. They cover various parts of it, but I think taken together, they help to move the needle on getting us closer to having that distracted driving legislation on the books. So the last part of our presentation before we get to questions is covering the federal and national. And this is really about preserving and expanding the gains we've made in Washington, D.C. and across the nation. So a big part of our policy efforts on the national level will revolve around finding ways to more explicitly align efforts to slow climate change with transportation policy. So to begin, according to the EPA, transportation remains our largest source of greenhouse gas emissions as a nation. A majority of those emissions, about 57%, comes from what are known as light-duty vehicles, which are essentially cars, trucks, and SUVs. While the federal government has begun to acknowledge that more needs to be done to prioritize active transportation and electric vehicles, there is still a lot of work to do. Part of that work for BikeWalk KC is looking for ways to partner more intentionally with organizations and groups working on the broader umbrella of sustainability policy. To that end, we are taking steps to join the REAMP organization, Midwest-focused collaborative whose North Star goal is to equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions in the region by 2050. Finally, there are additional funding opportunities through the bipartisan infrastructure law to consider as well. Beyond the aforementioned climate reduction program, there are several other programs we plan to study further for sustainability priorities in Kansas City. That includes programs like the Reconnecting Communities pilot, which could help the city to take steps to remake or remove portions of Highway 71. It also includes the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program, or ATIIP, which could fund the build out of key complete streets corridors. Finally, BikeWalkKC will continue working on issues related to the decriminalization of mobility. So, for reference, BikeWalkKC successfully pushed for the repeal of jaywalking and other changes to low-level offenses targeting people walking and biking in Kansas City, Missouri, back in 2021. Since then, BikeWalkKC has built upon that work, and that began with a how-to guide for advocates to use, and as of last year, a working paper with the National Association of City Transportation Officials entitled Breaking the Cycle. We expect these efforts to continue in 2023. In addition to continuing to contribute to the research on this issue, we have also taken steps to strengthen partnerships with people working to replicate what occurred in KCMO. That includes working with the National Safe Routes Partnership to organize a work group of advocates from across the country who are working to take similar steps. This work group will continue through June of this year. What all of this means is that BikeWalkKC will continue to share experiences and insights to enable advocates to take similar steps in communities across the country. The most recent win came earlier this week in Denver. There, advocates with the Denver Bicycle Lobby successfully advocated for legislation which decriminalizes jaywalking in the city. Those advocates were informed by our guide and have been working with us to strategize and execute this advocacy campaign for months. Congratulations to the Mile High City on this Mile High achievement. So before we get into our questions, there are just a couple other quick things I wanted to mention. So first things first is that Kansas City, Missouri will be having its budget hearing soon. It's budget season in Kansas City, and that means that it is important for you to get involved and for you to speak up for active transportation in our budget. What you're seeing here are the dates for the meetings where you can show up and you can say your piece about transportation, trees, safer streets, better trash pickup, anything you want. There will be two virtual meetings, one on February 25th and one on March 7th, and there will be a hybrid meeting, so a virtual and in-person option at City Hall on Saturday, March 4th from 9 a.m. to noon. This is a great opportunity to not only learn about other budget priorities, but also a really easy way to make your voice heard on active transportation in Kansas City. Consider going. So the last thing I'll say is that people often ask questions about, I care a lot about advocacy, I care a lot about walking and biking, but how am I supposed to get involved? And so what I want to leave you with are three key things that you can do to help us to make this policy platform successful in 2023. First is, shameless plug, sign up for our advocacy alerts. One of the ways that we work to inform our members of what is going on, whether it be in Kansas City, Missouri, Olathe, or somewhere else, is through our advocacy alerts, through our mailing list. Signing up there gets you connected with us and ensures that when something important comes up for you to speak up on, you're one of the first people to hear about it. Second thing is attend council meetings. One of the ways that we encourage people to learn about the process is to observe the process. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to go to council meetings to learn more about what is happening in your community. You might also be able to meet some other advocates in the process. The final part is, don't be afraid to meet with elected officials and staff, especially at the local level with your council members and your board of aldermen. It's a much easier time trying to connect with them than it would be your state representative or your congressperson. Take advantage of those opportunities to connect with your electeds and make sure that they know that you care about active transportation. With that, I want to thank you, and I am happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Thank you, Michael. That was great. I always appreciate hearing you kind of lay out the big picture of what we're working on over the year, because I know that I get bogged down in the details and the day-to-day stuff. And so it's great to hear you give us the high level so we have a good idea of where we're headed. Mm-hmm. So first of all, if you could please relieve my curiosity, I want to know who is the other state who doesn't have a distracted driving legislation.
The other state is Montana, the treasure state.
Do
Yes.
they have roads in Montana? I do. I've been on many of the roads in Montana, or some of them at least, and
Mm.
they're lovely. Yeah. So I want to start with a couple of questions that folks had from their registration. You covered actually a lot of what people wanted to know already in what you were going to talk about today anyway. Things like, how do you get involved? What's going on beyond just KC and we even talked about the possibility of an e-bike tax credit. But I wonder if you could talk to us a little about housing and transportation. Questions about, walkability and transit and housing. Are we addressing any concerns there, or are there other organizations in town or in the area that are heading up that process?
Yes. So the short version is yes, we are working somewhat with organizations that are working on issues related to housing and transportation. I will mention a few organizations that we work with are the KC Tenants, as well as LISC, both of which are organizations which work to advance policies which improve access to affordable housing in Kansas City. One thing that I'll say kind of broadly about housing and transportation is that BikeWalkKC has written a policy brief about the intersection of these two issues. The short version is that transportation is often the second biggest expense for a household behind housing. So you have to take care of your rent, but you also have to take care of your car payment. Additionally, owning a car is exorbitantly expensive. According to AAA, it costs up to $10,000 a year to own and maintain a car. And so when we talk about the need for both affordable housing and transportation, we are talking about the need to enable people to have the resources necessary to live. And so when we talk about how those two interact, a lot of it comes down to land use. If we choose to build out more single family housing, that makes it harder for us to be able to provide sidewalks, streets with bike infrastructure, buses, because you're building further and further out. You're contributing to sprawl. Whereas if we allow for the development of mixed use housing, things such as commercial or grocery store or doctor's offices on the bottom with housing in apartments on top, that helps to get more people in one space, which makes it easier to not only justify rapid transit routes, but also easier to get the taxes from the community necessary to pay for improved sidewalks, better accessibility, and more biking. And so the two are inextricably tied, and how we make policy decisions on one side of that will inevitably impact how we make policy decisions on the other.
Thanks, Michael. I think a lot of people come to Bike Walk maybe to start out with because they really like to ride their bikes or they like to go for walks. And then we're like, hey, but did you know that we also talk a lot about housing and climate and all of this, because it's all wrapped up together and you can't separate them out. You can't have good transportation and bicycling if you don't have good policy to go with all the rest of it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So speaking of the ways that biking and walking connects with other things, a question from Rachel in the chat. So KC is working on an east-west transit study to connect basically KU Med with the stadiums via transit, right?
Right.
They've got a couple of meetings coming up soon. Is there anything that BikeWalkKC is particularly advocating for, or do you have a suggestion for our members or our advocates that they might, mention at these meetings or keep an eye out for?
I think one thing to kind of keep an eye out for is which routes are identified that may also fall on the city's high injury network. So to take a quick step back, Kansas City adopted what's known as the Vision Zero Action Plan, which is meant to guide the city's efforts towards eliminating traffic fatalities by the year 2030. Part of the work to develop that plan was building and kind of filling out what's known as a high injury network. What that does is it identifies what streets within a community contribute to more crashes, more injuries, and more fatalities relative to the transportation system as a whole. And so I think it's really important that as people go in, they're asking, if we're building along these high injury networks, what additional steps are we doing to support pedestrians, cyclists, people with disabilities? Because while transit is the big connector, walking and biking are how we make those first and last mile elements work. So you can take a transit stop from KU Med out to the stadium, but in terms of getting up to the front door of either of those places, you're going to need either a sidewalk and or some sort of bike infrastructure. And so it's really important for us to ask those questions and to make sure that our city leaders are supporting investments that will create safer streets in addition to more frequent transit routes.
It always bums me out when my bus stop is like a pole on the, like a chunk of like grass. It's just on the side of the road. There's no sidewalk. There's no bench. Like, I don't know how you get there or get off of it.
Yeah.
And so having those, like how you, like people don't drive to the bus stop and just get like walk out the door. Like they walk to the bus stop or ride their bikes to the bus stop. Having
Right.
those connections is really important. That makes good sense.
Mhm.
And I think about a lot, like, if somebody gets off the bus and they need to cross the street, is there a safe place for them to cross the street?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
Good answer. Okay. Thanks, Michael.
Mhm.
And then here's kind of a fun one. How do you come up with a policy platform? How do you decide what are BikeWalkKC's priorities for the year?
Okay. Yeah. That's a great question. So I think there's kind of one of three ways that things end up in the policy platform. The first is it is typically will include a continuation of things that we started in the previous year. So we got something started in maybe this August or September that is going to take more time to get done, but it's still a priority. Second thing is knowing that certain things are going to be happening in the new year that we have to be mindful of, we have to put at the top of our list. So think of things like the Casey Spirit Playbook or the East-West Transit Study. We know those things are coming and we have to plan around those as a result. I think the other thing is really kind of based off of more general, and this is a little bit more squishy, but it's based a little bit more off of what we anticipate or what we've been dealing with in terms of certain themes and how we can use policy to address those issues as a result. So, in terms of something that we'll be pushing for and advocating for in the budget process, one of the big things we'll be pushing for is dedicated funding to improve staffing and resources for public engagement. This is due in large part to some of the challenges that we have seen with complete streets projects in recent months and what largely grew out of a lack of effective community engagement. So staff are told that they have to do community engagement for a certain period of time, but they don't have the money or staffing resources to do it more effectively. Are they doing enough by the law? Yes, they are. But is it sufficient? Not necessarily. And so if we can figure out ways to address that, then that is something that we can push for. And that's another example of something that gets added into our policy platform.
A quick plug for budget advocacy training. Speaking of that, we talk about the hold on. We talk about how something can be important, but if it's not important enough to budget for it, then it can't be a priority.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then a question from Shelley. Are we connected at all with Imagine KC?
Um, I don't think so. But we're always happy to connect with new partners.
That's not one I'm familiar with. Shelley, if you like, I'd be totally welcome to have you unmute if you want and tell us about it.
It is the strategic plan for the city of Kansas City, Missouri. So it's their 20-year vision for what the city, how they want the city to grow. And it includes a lot of infrastructure planning, specifically the Green Line. The Green Line is a path that's envisioned to circle downtown Kansas City. They've got a few sections of it. Actually, I think it's the east section, the east leg of it. I believe it's funded and part of it's already installed. They're working on the south leg and trying to identify funding for other legs. As they are planning, we've been encouraging them to ensure that you don't just install a path, but you connect to neighborhoods, businesses, entertainment, healthcare, all kinds of things, or the path will just be a path and may or may not be used as extensively as anticipated. In addition to just infrastructure, they're looking at neighborhood revitalization and expanded housing, some of those other things. It's led by the Downtown Council.
Yeah, I think I looked it up, and I think that is the it's with Mark also, right? The Mid-America Regional Council.
I don't believe they're leading it. I believe it's led by, they might be attending. I think they might be attending and involved with it, but
Maybe I'm looking at the wrong website. We are definitely involved with or definitely supporting, at least advocating for a lot of elements in the KC Spirit Playbook comprehensive plan. But I will dig into that Imagine KC a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And see
yeah, Shelley, thank you for making that known and bringing that to our attention.
Well, your advocacy efforts align, well, your goals align with a lot of what they're trying to do. And I think it would be in everyone's best interest for you to be, for BikeWalkKC to be aware at minimum.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah.
Bob, I think you had a meeting or you had a question about a meeting coming up on March 1st, right?
Yeah, I live in Brookside on Meyer, and the corner or the intersection of Brookside Road, Wyandotte, and Meyer is very dangerous. And so a guy in my building, I live in the big blue building there at Warnell and Meyer, is trying to get together to figure out how we can make it safer. And he's contacted mostly a lot of local groups, the homeowners association and so on. And there's going to be a meeting on March 1st at 7 p.m. to bring all these people together so that we can figure out, then the next step is to figure out what we want to see happening to make walking in Brookside safer. And obviously, we've all heard about different plans. And of course, the problem is with the trolley line, the Brookside part, which breaks it up, is particularly dangerous. And I see that all the time because I look right down on the trolley path at Meyer. So that's what the meeting is going to be. I noticed that Eric said he's going to come, and it looks like there are going to be a number of people there.
Very good to hear. So,
and I believe this is you want, and I think he talked with you a couple of days ago, right, Michael?
Yes, he did. Yeah, Bob was actually at our first. The other Bob was at our first budget advocacy training. Yes. The one thing I'll say about Meyer specifically, while we're on the subject, is that we know that the city has discussed plans to not only improve the connection between that gap with the trolley track trail on Meyer, but specifically the Meyer corridor as a whole.
Right.
And we want to ensure that the engagement is done correctly so that we don't have similar issues like what has occurred on Truman. And so we plan to meet with Bob. We're going to reach out to him, but we also want to start reaching out to some of the other key stakeholders along there to learn more about what priorities they have and how we can help them advocate a unified message of safety and complete streets and better improved transportation options along that corridor. So
Well,
we'll keep you posted about that as well.
The one advantage of Meyer over Truman is Meyer is not a street with commercial development. So you're not going to have business owners talking about, you've taken away our parking.
Sure. And I'll say really quick too, is that if people do have additional questions about Truman Road, we will stay on a little bit longer to talk about that as well. So.
Can I ask another question? Something just occurred to me.
Yeah.
All right. In 2019, I bicycled to Wrigley Field. And in fact, in the 70s, when I lived in Chicago, I bicycled to Wrigley Field. Other than taking the out, it's the best way to get there. But they had free valet parking at Wrigley Field underneath the Addison L station, if you're familiar with Wrigley Field. Is there any attempt to get decent bike parking at the stadiums?
Yes, and Eric may jump in here if I forget anything pertinent. So the short answer is yes. BikeWalkKC has been trying to get bike parking out at the stadiums for a little while now. We had actually done a little bit of a legislative scan or landscape analysis looking at bike parking options in other communities. And Wrigley Field was actually one of the ones that we identified as a pretty good example of bike parking apparatus. The challenge that we run into is that the Royals are moving, since the Royals have basically said they're moving downtown at this point, they're not really, they're open to it, but their obvious bigger focus is let's get downtown. The Chiefs, unfortunately, have seemed to make it very clear that they're not interested in bike parking of any sort because they see it as a liability. We are still trying to have conversations to explain that there are ways to create safer routes for people, but I'll be the first to admit that it is definitely an uphill battle at the moment.
All right, we've got just about a minute left, but we are here to answer your questions. So if anyone has anything further they'd like to add, we'd be happy to take it. We thank you all for being here tonight. This has been an excellent meeting. We appreciate your questions. We appreciate you engaging, whether you're here with us live or whether you're watching at home. This has been great. I would like to just give a quick plug. You came here tonight because you want a brighter future for our region, and we do too. So if you are so moved, with your help, we can make that brighter future a possibility. If you're not yet a BikeWalkKC member, I invite you to invest in the work that we're all doing together to redefine our streets as places for people, to build a culture of active living, like Michael said earlier today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your commitment to a safer, more connected Kansas City Metro. I will follow up Friday or possibly Monday, depending on how tomorrow goes, with a follow-up email that will include a whole bunch of links, because Amy and Rogers have been very busy adding the links to the chat tonight. And I'll include a whole bunch of links. We'll have a website version of the policy platform, and I will also include the recording from tonight's event so that you can watch again at home and review some more. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we will see you next time. Thank you.